Walter edged forward toward the entrance, each movement painstaking. His wheelchair rolled slowly, hands shaking with fatigue and resignation. He kept his gaze low, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. Stairs had always been part of his life, but today, they felt like a mountaintop. Standing before him was Ethan, young, arrogantly composed, his coldness cutting the air like ice. "This isn't a place for people like you," Ethan sneered. Walter froze, the words hitting him like a blow to the chest. In that charged silence that followed, Ethan's sharp, mocking laugh rang out, taunting and hollow. It reverberated off the walls, lingering in the space between them. Walter's lips parted, as if to speak, but no sound emerged. Behind them, just 7 steps away, Jackson was rooted, still, silent, watching every nuance. His eyes never blinked, his fingers curled inside his coat. He observed Ethan's cruelty, Walter's pain, and the trembling edge of control in that moment. And then, as if he'd weighed an unseen balance, Jackson simply turned and walked away. At that instant, in the depths of his heart, a decision crystallized. From that second onward, there would be a new plan. Jackson would return, but not as some detached CEO. His identity in this moment shifted. Jackson, now in his mid-40s and at the helm of one of the country's largest supermarket chains, had always been strict yet fair. Colleagues knew him as sharp and calculating, but beneath that steel, he believed in people. Kindness, taught and modeled properly, could build not just businesses, but legacies. This belief had been seeded by his father. Family Mart wasn't just a business. It was more than a brand. It was meant to be a place where customers felt respected and employees treated strangers like neighbors. For years, Jackson trusted deeply in that ethos. He trusted in his managers. He trusted Ethan. Until today. That small scene outside the store cracked something fundamental inside Jackson. It wasn't just disappointment or fury. It was a deep betrayal of every core value he held sacred. That moment wasn't an isolated lapse. It was a reflection, a symptom of something rotten beneath the surface. Now Jackson sat alone in his office. Behind him on the wall was a sign, "We treat staff like family." Simple, bold white letters that had always anchored him. His father placed them there on opening day, and Jackson had repeated those words at every meeting. He expected every manager to live them out. For decades, he believed. But today, looking at that sign, it felt hollow. What once sounded like a promise now echoed like a lie. The phrase, "staff like family," had lost all warmth. Jackson asked himself, how far down did the rot run? What had changed in the family he'd built? In his mind, he revisited his younger self. 17-year-old Jackson stocking shelves at a small store. Invisible. Scorned. One customer had called him useless. That memory cut deeper than the faces who whispered it. Then and there, he vowed, if he ever owned a store, no one would feel as worthless as he had. That vow fueled every late night, every sacrifice, every strategic decision he made. The rules he enforced came from that silent promise. But standing now in his office, he wondered, had he failed? Today's scene was different. This time, cruelty didn't come from strangers. It came from his own team, from people he'd trusted, people he called family. Jackson put his palms together, staring at them as though answers might be etched on his skin. But nothing emerged. The tension between loyalty and profit had been unknowingly shifting. Somewhere in that shift, things had broken. He sat still, feeling a heaviness that sleep couldn't wash away. This wasn't just exhaustion, it was personal. He had believed. He had trusted. And now, betrayal from his own people reverberated more painfully than any outsider's cruelty. Jackson stood frozen in the quiet of his office. In front of him, the company's core values gleamed on a glass panel, bold, etched in pristine lettering: respect, service, kindness. Words he had walked by countless times, never really seeing them. They were part of the architecture, as forgettable as the tiles underfoot. But now, in this moment of bitter awakening, those same words hit differently. They no longer inspired. They accused. He read them again: respect, service, kindness. Each word slammed into his conscience, one after another, like echoes of promises betrayed. What was the value of those ideals if the very people meant to uphold them now dismissed them so easily? What was the purpose of a company built on a foundation that had silently cracked beneath him? The stillness around him deepened. No reports, no spreadsheets, no leadership meetings could answer the questions pounding in his mind. He didn't blink. He didn't move. In that silence, his resolve formed, not out of pride, but from a need for truth, no matter how painful that truth might be. Jackson stepped away from the glass, back into the shadows of the room. He knew now. He couldn't rely on second-hand feedback. Numbers could be manipulated. Smiles in front of cameras meant nothing. He couldn't trust reports or reputations. He needed to see it himself. He needed to feel what the customers felt, what the forgotten felt. He opened his desk drawer. Inside, an old baseball cap, worn and faded. Beside it, a pair of cheap, scratched glasses. He placed them on with purpose. His reflection in the window no longer looked like a CEO, and that was exactly what he needed. Tomorrow, he would return, not as Jackson, the executive, but as an ordinary, invisible man. A shadow. Not even Ethan, Josh, Tyler, or Emma would recognize him. He wouldn't ask questions. He wouldn't give orders. He would simply watch, listen, and let the truth reveal itself. And so, the next morning, Jackson crossed the threshold of his own store, under a different light. The cap low, the glasses crooked, his posture unassuming. Just another tired customer on an average day. Ethan stood at the entrance, his arms folded, his expression blank and disengaged. "Morning," he mumbled without a hint of sincerity. No eye contact, no warmth, just obligation. Jackson nodded slightly. Ethan turned away before Jackson took even 3 steps. No welcome, no connection. A subtle but sharp cut, and Jackson felt it deeply. He remembered the early days, training employees to greet customers like old friends. Smiles, engagement, empathy. That vision was gone. He was invisible, and his silence was no longer detachment. It was part of the investigation. Moving down the aisle, Jackson stopped near Ethan. He spoke softly, with hesitation. "Excuse me, could you tell me where the flower is?" Ethan didn't even turn his head. "Big signs, look up," he muttered. Jackson played the part. "Sorry, I don't see it." Ethan glanced sideways, his eyes sharp, cold. "Maybe try reading," he said. A laugh echoed from nearby. "Josh," quick, mocking. Jackson lowered his gaze, playing the role to perfection. But inside, something heavy settled deeper. This wasn't just poor service. This was embedded cruelty. Routine. Normal. He moved on, slow and quiet. But just a few aisles later, it happened again. An older woman, frail, uncertain, struggled to lift a heavy box. Her hands trembled, her eyes searching for kindness. Tyler stood just feet away. "Could you help me, please?" she asked softly. "Nope, not my job," he replied without even turning. She blinked, stunned, then reached again. The box shifted. A corner sliced her finger. She wiped the blood against her skirt. Josh snickered. Ethan ignored her. Jackson stood still, fists clenched under his coat. This wasn't an isolated failure. This was a culture problem. They weren't a team anymore. They were a pack. Cold, self-absorbed, dangerous in their indifference. Nearby, Jackson, accidentally, knocked over a row of glass bottles. The clatter echoed loudly. He stepped back, eyes wide with pretend embarrassment. Ethan looked over. His shoulders sagged with loud frustration. He walked over, slow, exaggerated annoyance with every step. When he reached the mess, he didn't say a word. Didn't help. Just stood there watching, like Jackson was a burden. Jackson bent down, hands unsteady. Ethan's gaze didn't soften. He turned and walked away. The bottles remained. The message was clear. You don't matter here. As Jackson reached for the last bottle, a voice hissed from behind. Probably another old beggar, Emma muttered, sharp and casual, like cruelty was second nature. She didn't see how close he was. She didn't care. Ethan snorted. Josh was silent, and Jackson just stood there. His heart slowed, his breath deepened. The words weren't meant for him, but he heard them, and something inside him shifted. They weren't just unkind. They were broken. They judged. They dismissed. They mocked. The very people they were paid to serve. Jackson let the silence stretch long, burning. Another old beggar. That label echoed in his head. He placed the bottle back on the shelf. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. His steps slow but steady. Jackson reached inside his jacket and pulled out a small black notebook. Plain, old. He flipped it open. He started to write. Jackson flipped open the notebook again. He didn't write a sentence. Just 3 words. Emma. Old beggar. That was all. He closed it, returned it to his jacket pocket. His eyes no longer carried disappointment. They were sharp now, focused, cold, quiet. The kind of quiet that listens with purpose. For years, Jackson had chosen to believe in the good of people. But now, he began collecting proof that perhaps he'd been wrong. Across the aisle, Emma laughed at something Ethan said. Her laughter was careless, detached from empathy. Jackson didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply watched. Like a hunter, quiet, patient. And as he did, the store around him seemed to shift. Not physically, but spiritually. It felt colder. Not because Jackson had changed, but because he now saw things clearly. His pocket notebook was no longer a prop. It was a record, and the list was only beginning. Moments later, the pattern repeated. An elderly man, frail and slow, struggled to push a loaded cart down the center aisle. His knuckles were white from effort, his gait unsteady. For a moment, Jackson held his breath. Ethan was approaching. Maybe this time. But instead of helping, Ethan placed both hands on the cart and shoved it aside as if clearing garbage from his path. The old man stumbled, catching himself against a shelf. Ethan never looked back. Josh laughed again, sharp and short like a punctuation mark to cruelty. Jackson's chest tightened. This wasn't about neglect anymore. It was about action. Cruelty wasn't hidden. It was normalized, emboldened by silence. Jackson forced himself to remain still. He needed to feel this, all of it, to understand how deep it ran. Each moment painted the picture in darker shades. What once felt like disappointment was hardening into something more bitter, betrayal. Not of a company, of values, of his father's legacy, of his own faith in humanity. He followed them slowly, his steps silent. Ethan wandered through the aisles, aimless, detached. Tyler and Josh trailed behind, whispering and chuckling. Their words were low, but their disrespect rang loud. Emma restocked without ever acknowledging the people around her. Not one looked up. Not one offered help. The store wasn't failing because it was busy. It was failing because no one cared. Jackson recorded it all, not with a camera, but with memory. Each ignored customer, each sidelong glare, each missed opportunity for kindness became part of the weight he carried. It wasn't a bad day. It was a culture, a cold rhythm embedded into their behavior. This wasn't customer service gone wrong. It was a system that had decayed from within. Jackson adjusted his glasses and kept walking. At the end of the aisle, he spotted an elderly woman holding a can. Her hands trembled. Her glasses hung from her neck. She turned, hopeful, as Tyler approached. "Can't read?" he snapped, without compassion. The woman flinched. Tyler pointed behind her with sharp impatience. "Back shelf, big sign, maybe open your eyes." She froze, lips moving silently, stunned by the sting. Tyler shook his head, muttering, and walked off. Jackson didn't write this one down. He didn't have to. It was burned into him. The look on the woman's face, the helpless clutch of the wrong can in her arms. It was another moment kindness had been offered the chance to exist and been rejected. Nearby, Josh leaned toward Ethan and whispered, just loud enough, "Old people. What's the point? They're useless anyway." Ethan didn't flinch, didn't disagree. He smirked. That moment stopped Jackson in his tracks. The words weren't said for impact. They were said because Josh meant them. Jackson's breathing slowed. His chest didn't rise with rage. It sank deeper with clarity. This wasn't immaturity. It wasn't stress. It was belief. A belief that had formed under his watch. He didn't speak. Not because he lacked words, but because silence now held more power. His right hand clenched slowly, nails pressing into his palm. Then he tucked it deeper into his coat, trying to hold the storm inside. The urge to stop everything right then, fire them, shout, break the illusion, burned inside him. But he didn't. He couldn't. Not yet. He had to witness it all. Every poisonous second, every smug smirk. Ethan and Josh laughed again. But Jackson wasn't angry. He was heartbroken. Because these weren't strangers. They were once his greatest hope. And then, as if time collapsed around him, Jackson saw it all again. Ethan, young, bright-eyed, promising. Josh, eager to prove himself. He had believed in them, fought for them. What had changed? Was it the pressure of the business, the shortcuts he didn't notice? Or had he changed? Had Jackson slowly stopped leading while still pretending he was? He looked down, the floor blurring beneath his feet. Around him, the store buzzed faintly. But inside his mind, everything was quiet. He wasn't undercover anymore. He was just a man in the middle of a crumbling dream, his father's dream. A loud clatter snapped him back. A box fell from a man's hands, early 60s, slow-moving. The man bent down, awkwardly, trying to recover it. The laughter started. Ethan, Josh, Tyler, chuckling like it was nothing, like the pain of others was entertainment. Emma stood across the aisle. She smiled, not with empathy, but in amusement. Jackson stood, unmoving, the sound of their laughter sharp in his ears. It was the same laughter he'd once endured as a boy. Laughter that doesn't fade. He didn't see employees anymore. He saw strangers. Cold, unfamiliar. And the distance between them widened with each breath. Jackson lowered his posture, dragging his feet. He picked up a dented can and held it close, as if it were a question. He approached Ethan again. "Is this still good?" His voice trembled, broken. Ethan didn't even look. "You can afford it." Jackson didn't reply. Ethan scoffed. "Doesn't matter. Put it back." Josh smirked beside him, enjoying the moment. Jackson nodded softly. He played the part. But inside, he wrote that moment down, carved it into memory. Not because he was documenting their failures, but because he was preparing to rebuild everything they'd broken. This wasn't an isolated mistake. It was a reflection of how they saw people, not as human beings, but as obstacles. Jackson turned slowly and walked away, not with anger, but with a crushing weight in his chest. Another test, another failure. His plan hadn't been about catching them in the act. It was about understanding how far the rot had spread, and why. Behind the next shelf he paused. His hands trembled. His throat tightened with the pressure of everything he wanted to say. Every instinct screamed at him to end the charade, to rip off the disguise, say his name out loud, remind Ethan, remind all of them, who he really was. But instead, he bit down hard on his lower lip until his jaw ached and the taste of blood hit his tongue. This wasn't the moment. He wasn't after apologies born of fear. He didn't want to shame them into regret. He needed the truth. The full, raw truth. Not reactions, not performance. Only then could he fix what was broken. So he stood still and let the fire inside burn. Because sometimes the cruelest part of leadership is standing silently in the face of what you thought was impossible and letting it unfold. Not out of weakness, out of purpose. So you can learn where the cracks began. Up ahead, an older man, gentle in posture, soft in tone, approached Tyler. "Excuse me," the man said kindly, pointing toward Jackson. "Could you help him? He seems a little lost." Tyler didn't hesitate. "Not my problem," he said flatly. Then, turning to Jackson with clear contempt in his voice, "You'll figure it out, old man." And louder, just in case someone had missed it. "Not my job to babysit." The kind man who had tried to help looked down, humiliated. Jackson stood frozen. For a moment, he wasn't a CEO. He wasn't a father's son carrying on a legacy. He was just another problem, another inconvenience in the eyes of his own staff. And now, he wasn't the only one feeling it. Customers were starting to notice, but Tyler didn't care. None of them did. The damage wasn't subtle. It was worn like armor. Jackson drifted through the store, silent, between aisles, past conversations, observing. Each word that went unsaid, each forced smile, each ignored. Opportunity for decency. He opened his notebook again. He didn't write full thoughts anymore, just facts. Ethan, no eye contact. Josh laughed at old man. Tyler, not my problem. Emma ignored request. The pages grew heavy. Not from ink, but from meaning, from weight. This wasn't stress. It wasn't a busy day. It was the system. All of them, part of a culture that had shifted while Jackson wasn't looking. He closed the notebook slowly and looked up, not at employees, but at evidence. He slowed his pace. For the first time that day, doubt wrapped its fingers around his chest. Was this really just their failure? Or was it his? Had he trusted too easily? Had he built policies that made them heartless? Did he trade compassion for efficiency without realizing it? He looked around. Shelves were stocked. Floors were clean. The store looked perfect, on the outside, but inside it was hollow, dead behind the eyes, a structure without a soul. Jackson had built this, not with cruelty, but with neglect. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years he felt fear, not of losing profit, but of losing purpose. What his father had left him, what it meant, was slipping away. Up ahead, Ethan again. Another elderly man, slow and uncertain, tried to steer a cart. Ethan approached, not with help, but hostility. "Move it," he snapped, loud and sharp. "Drag faster?" The man looked confused, scared. Ethan stepped closer. "You deaf or just slow? Some of us got work to do." He bumped past the man, hitting his cart. Josh snorted. Tyler smirked. Emma kept silent. Jackson stood frozen. This wasn't poor training. This was hate. Clear, proud, cruel. The impact hit Jackson harder than he expected. But still, he didn't move, because Ethan wasn't finished, and neither was he. Jackson's eyes, once sharp, were now hollow. Not from lack of vision, but from loss. The kind that sinks into your bones. He looked at their faces. Ethan, Josh, Tyler, Emma. They weren't his team anymore. They were strangers. He slouched lower, dragging his feet, grabbing a dented can. He became the version of himself they ignored. "Is this still good?" he asked, voice cracked and vulnerable. Ethan didn't look up. "You can afford it." Jackson stayed quiet. Ethan added with a smirk, "Doesn't matter. Put it back." Josh watched, amused. Jackson nodded, as if in agreement. But inside, he carved that moment deep into memory. Because it would return. Not today, but soon. This wasn't about reporting them anymore. This was about reckoning. Jackson turned away, slowly, quietly. One more aisle, one more test, one more failure. Behind the shelf he heard voices. Josh, laughing. "Boss never checks the cameras." Tyler joined in. "Yeah, he's too busy counting money," Josh replied, without irony. "Exactly. We could sleep on shift and no one would notice." Tyler chuckled. "Maybe we should." Jackson stood still. They weren't whispering. They weren't hiding. They were comfortable, believing they were invisible. And the worst part? They weren't wrong. He had trusted cameras more than conversations, systems more than people, and the result was right in front of him. Tyler and Josh wandered off, still laughing. Jackson didn't follow, because now he knew. The problem wasn't their words. It was that they meant them. He stayed motionless. He had heard everything. Every joke, every cruelty, every smug assurance that no one would ever call them out. But someone had watched. Jackson had watched, and something inside him cracked. Not loudly, not like glass, but like something deeper. Bone deep, rage, not wild, not loud, quiet, cold, controlled. He wanted to explode, to throw them out. But not yet. He closed his eyes, breathed, and opened them with clarity. He wasn't recording anymore. He was preparing. Judgment wasn't coming tomorrow. It was already here. He turned down the final aisle, past the shelves, past the laughter. No one noticed. No one looked twice. Just another customer leaving. He pushed open the front doors. Sunlight hit his face, but he didn't feel warm. Not yet. His hands no longer trembled. His mind, once clouded by disbelief, had never been sharper. The notebook inside Jackson's jacket felt heavier now, not because of the ink, but because of the truth it carried. It wasn't about a few bad apples. It was about a culture, a sickness that had been left to grow. And Jackson had seen enough. He didn't look back as the doors closed behind him, but he wasn't leaving. Not really. The next time those doors opened, it wouldn't be a quiet man in disguise stepping through. It would be the CIO, the founder's son. The leader they'd forgotten was still watching. The message came swiftly. Staff meeting, break room, 10 minutes, mandatory, no reason given, no name attached, no explanation. Ethan frowned. Josh grumbled. Tyler shrugged. Emma rolled her eyes. They gathered without urgency, dragging chairs, staring into phones, chatting carelessly. They weren't nervous. They weren't curious. They were comfortable, too comfortable. And then they walked into the break room, and everything changed. Jackson stood at the front. No jacket, no cap, no disguise. Just him. For a moment, no one reacted. Then confusion dawned. Ethan blinked. Josh slouched in a seat. Tyler muttered, "Why is the old guy here?" No one connected the dots. Not yet. Jackson said nothing. He let them settle, let their guard stay down. Because what was coming wasn't anger. It was clarity. He opened a folder slowly. Still no words, no raised voice. And then he began to read. Customer reported being ignored at the entrance. A pause. Another customer was told to read the signs after asking for help. Another pause. An elderly man's cart was pushed aside. No warning, no apology. The room began to shift. A chill crept in. Multiple customers overheard staff laughing at older guests. Ethan fidgeted. Josh looked away. Emma's arms crossed tighter. Tyler smiled nervously, trying to fake indifference. Jackson continued, unshaken. Every line read like a cold indictment. Every incident painfully familiar. And then he closed the folder. He looked up for the first time, meeting their eyes. One by one, they understood. This wasn't a report. It was a reckoning. From the folder, Jackson removed a cap, the same faded one. Then a pair of scratched glasses. He placed them on the table, silently. Ethan's face lost color. Josh's jaw fell. Tyler's posture stiffened. Emma's arms dropped to her sides. Jackson let the silence hang. No need to explain. The customer they'd laughed at, ignored, shoved aside. That had been him. Then Jackson spoke. I saw everything. He didn't shout. He didn't waver. He opened the notebook and read back their words. Not my job. Can't you read? Another old beggar. He paused. Useless anyway. The air thickened. Shame flooded the room. Move it. Drag faster. Eyes dropped to the floor. He turned the page. Boss never checks the cameras. We could sleep on shift and no one would notice. Jackson closed the book, not with rage, with finality. Then he looked at each of them, eyes steady. I stood, he said, 7 steps behind you. Ethan's breath hitched. I heard everything. His gaze moved from Ethan to Josh, to Tyler, to Emma. I watched you push that cart, he said to Ethan. I watched you laugh, to Josh. I watched you ignore, to Emma. And I watched you mock, to Tyler. I watched all of you. Silence, not defensive silence, crushed silence. I didn't check cameras, he continued, his voice now steel. I didn't read reports. I stood in your aisles. I listened. And they knew. This wasn't about policies anymore. This wasn't about business. They hadn't just failed the store. They had failed him. Later, Jackson sat alone with Ethan. No audience, no performance, just 2 men in the echo of truth. Ethan's head hung low. I was tired, he said quietly. Overworked. Customers, they're hard. I didn't mean to be like this. Jackson waited, then, softly, no. Ethan looked up, confused. Hard days don't make you cruel, Jackson said. Bad shifts don't make you cold. Ethan swallowed. Your problem, Jackson said, stepping closer, isn't your workload. It's your choices. Ethan's eyes shimmered, but no tears fell. Jackson let the silence stretch. Kindness is hard, he said, but so is hatred, and today you chose hatred. Ethan looked away. Jackson finished the thought. The situation doesn't decide who you are. You do. Ethan stood in silence, and then, finally, he said, I didn't mean to lose myself. He looked down at his hands. I used to want to help people, but somewhere along the way, I stopped caring. Jackson didn't interrupt. I thought being numb would protect me. I thought people didn't deserve kindness anymore. His voice faltered. But now, I don't know who I am. And for the first time, Jackson saw not a failed employee, but a broken soul, searching for light. He nodded slowly. I should fire you. Ethan flinched. But I won't. Ethan looked up, startled. Because firing you won't fix you, Jackson said, calm and firm. And it won't fix this. You lost your way. But people who are lost can be taught. Jackson's tone softened. I'm not giving you mercy. I'm giving you responsibility. Training, retraining, accountability. You're not done here, he said. Not until you remember who you were. Ethan nodded, and Jackson saw it. Not guilt, growth. Because people don't change from punishment alone. They change when they're given purpose. The next morning, Walter returned. Same wheelchair, same quiet eyes. But someone waited this time. Ethan, no smirk, no arrogance, just a man, stripped down to humility. He stepped forward. I'm sorry, he said. No excuses, no defenses, just truth. Walter said nothing at first. Then he nodded. Once. Forgiving. Ethan's shoulders dropped, not in defeat, but in relief. Walter reached out. Ethan took his hand. They held it for a moment. No rush. And in that silence, something began to heal. From a distance, Jackson watched. Not from pride. From hope. This wasn't the end, but it was a start. He looked around the store, every aisle, every choice, every silence where kindness could have lived and didn't. He had learned something. Kindness isn't automatic. It's a decision. A decision made when no one's watching. A decision made when it's hard. He turned to his staff. Some were changing, some were still lost. But every one of them had a choice. He thought of Walter. He thought of Ethan, and he said, not loud, just clear, "Kindness is a choice." He paused. "What about you?" The story ended there. But the answer, that part belongs to the listener.